first, I want to thank Connor and Camilo for the invitation to work on this project. For both Zulia and I, we're going to try to split up the presentation so you don't have bald guys talking to you all afternoon. And so the idea, I'm going to take the first part and talk a little bit about general dynamics in Tijuana. And then I'll turn to Zulia, who actually lives in Tijuana, and can talk about some of the dynamics there. And then I'll talk a little bit about the cross-border dynamics. Thank you very much. If I can figure this out without... I'm happy to stand. Oh, it's very sensitive. My aim is not so good. I need a new prescription.
I think you are going to have to say click. Okay, yes. So,
you know, I'm just going to stand up. I would prefer to stand. This is the only exercise I'm going to get today, so I'm just going to stand. Yeah. No, it's all right. I like to move around.
Está en proceso de escritura. Debe estar en 2 meses máximo. No, don't worry.
So this is actually based on a briefing paper that we prepared at Connor and Camilo's request, which tries to just provide an overview, very descriptive, of the dynamics of kidnapping in Tijuana and the cross-border region. So the focus kind of was intending to try to give some general discussion of what we have going on in our neck of the border.
If you want to use the clicker actually just from there, it would be great. That is the...
I don't trust the clicker anymore. But it's also related to another paper that we did on recent increases in violent crime in Tijuana. So if you're interested in either of those papers, happy to share those. Just to start out, to give you a little bit of context for those who are not familiar with the area that we're talking about, Tijuana is the largest city on the border. It is a city of about 1.8 million inhabitants. It's home to the almost half of the population of the entire state of Baja California, and it only occupies a very small fraction of the state's territory. So there's very high population density, and it's a rapidly growing city. It's in the last decade or two been one of the 5 fastest growing cities in the country, and accumulates new people on a basis of almost 100 people a day. So it's a fascinating place. And what's really significant about Tijuana is it's the only major Mexican municipality that borders a major, El Paso, sorry, a large U.S. city. San Diego has approximately 3 million people. El Paso is 700,000. So there's more parity in terms of the sizes of the population, but it's also, interestingly, much more Anglo on the northern side of the border and much less integrated. So San Diego and Tijuana are really an anomaly demographically, culturally, along the border in lots of ways. Our approach, as I mentioned, is sort of more descriptive. We use official data, which have their own problems, both from the national government and from the state government, to try to look at kidnapping statistics. We do some geospatial analysis at the neighborhood level. Prior to this, I had not seen a breakdown of crimes by neighborhood, that is by colonia. And so this was a fun exercise for our mapping efforts. And we primarily relied on newspaper and archival analysis. But to give you a sense of what's going on in Tijuana, first it's really important to mention that as part of the general trends in Mexico, I don't have the national level homicide statistics. What I have to show you here are the trends that we've seen locally in Tijuana, using homicide as kind of an indicator of the overall security situation, alongside lesiones, or assaults, injuries by assault. There was a really intense period of violence in 2008 and 2009 in Tijuana, where we saw over 1,000 murders a year, actually in 2009, that were really just very short spikes in numbers of homicides over a period of a month or two. But the nature of the violence that we saw was gruesome. It was intense. You had bodies being hung from bridges. You had people being decapitated, dismembered, tortured, all kinds of horrific uses of violence that made this a very intense time in the city of Tijuana, very similar to the kinds of dynamics that we were seeing here in Ciudad Juarez, next to El Paso. And then things kind of calmed down for reasons that we're going to explain. There was a conflict between major criminal organizations that operate in the city of Tijuana around this time. But as that conflict subsided, things calmed down considerably in terms of general patterns of criminal violence, until about late 2014, early 2015, when we started to see levels of violence coming up quite significantly as measured by homicide. And also by 2017, beginning to surpass the levels that we saw even in the worst times in that earlier wave of violence. So there's these sort of two periods of violence that are important to understand about Tijuana. The other thing that's important to talk about is the geospatial distribution of some of this criminal violence in particular parts of the city. Last year, which was the worst year, in 2017, where we did this study, the worst violence was concentrated in just 3 neighborhoods that made up about 50% of all homicides. So Eastern Tijuana and the Sanchez Taboada neighborhood, where Zulia lives, right? Right. Yeah, so part of the story here, I don't want to get into too much detail, but this is the new and growing sector of the city. This is where people who are moving from other parts of the country, who are low income or jobless, build ramshackle houses and sort of make their way into the Tijuana economy. The Sanchez Taboada neighborhood's a little bit special. It is an area that is currently a hotbed for one of the major criminal organizations that is active in the city, and we'll talk more about that. But the point is, there is a very, as is typical with most crime, there is a very place-relevant distribution of homicide in the city of Tijuana. And then just one other thing to talk about is how other kinds of crimes other than homicide play out. And interestingly, around the time that we had a spike in homicides, we also saw a big spike in certain kinds of violent crime like robbery. Particularly, these are, sorry for lack of translation, but these are home invasion robberies or robberies of residences. These in yellow are robberies on the street or the via pública, and then these are commercial robberies or restaurants, establishments, etc. So you can see you're really much safer at home than you are in the street. And recently, even though street-level crime has been relatively contained compared to the past, we have seen an increase in commercial robberies. So just that's as a general panorama. I'm going to hand off to Zulia to talk a little bit about the dynamics of kidnapping. I can sit here.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm not sure actually that we're safe at home now because commandos are actually going into our homes and kidnapping and then disappearances. So, yes, as I'm going to link the presentation today, as we talked yesterday, especially Gabriela pointed out on other criminal cells or actors that might be kidnapping. And in the case of Tijuana, as I argued yesterday, yes, there is organized crime and organized crime cells linked, kidnapping, specifically the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco Nueva Generación, which is working or allied with the Arellano Felix family. So I'm not sure if you guys know these fellows. For example, Benjamin is in jail. Where is Ramon? No? Yeah, I think Javier, the name of Javier is Ramon. Javier Ramon, yeah. He's dead. He was assassinated in Mazatlan a couple of years ago, 2009, I believe. So this would be actually the first generation of Arellano Felix family. Now we're in the second generation, no? The sons of these guys, which is Fernando Sanchez Arellano, called El Piloto, along with another cousins, are managing or leading this organization along with the Jalisco Nueva Generación. Also, while this was back in 2008, 2010, while he was working his way into Tijuana, fighting against Sinaloa cartel, internally there was a dispute with Teodoro García Cimental, alias El Teo. He was known to kidnap thousands of residents and send them to La Gallera, which is now actually Fernando Seguera is working right now, currently in there. So they put them into acid. They put the victims into acid and disappear. Only what was left, it was the bones and the teeth. No. So wait, secuestro, extorsión. Okay, so as I mentioned yesterday, there was, of course, a period of violence in 2008, 2010, and we are looking at an increment in 2015, 16, 17, and it's increasing. However, we don't see kidnapping increasing, so we should be careful with that information because, as I mentioned, there is a 95% lack or unregistered incidents, no? Could you click? El Muletas, yeah. Also, it's important to take into notice that Chapo Guzman was incarcerated and then sent away to New York. Could you pass? Yeah. La pasada, la anterior. ¿Dónde está? Okay, esa. Okay, so you can see that when Chapo Guzman was detained and then sent to New York, the spiral of violence in Tijuana again increased, but there was a new cartel working its way through, which is Jalisco Nueva Generación, which allied not only in Tijuana with, well, in Tijuana was with the Arellano Felix, but it allied also in Veracruz with other members of the cartel, for example, the Gulf Cartel, along with many other parts of Mexico. So these guys are working an impressive strategy. Can you change that? There. So that would be the 2018 crime map. No? As you can see, most of the illicits are committed in El Centro that we talked about yesterday, El Centro, Sánchez Taboada. La Presa, it's strange because it's part of an ejido, which is a different concept, and you can see that it's spread out. I believe that 2019, much of the incidents, not only of kidnapping, but homicides will be between Sánchez Taboada and La Presa. Okay, so we made this about the highest incidence of crime, regular crime, robberies, kidnapping, etc. And these are the zones. However, in kidnapping, we're talking again on Playas de Tijuana, which is Otay, Camino Verde, Colonia Centro, no? Okay. And this is interesting on these other elements that are contributing to kidnapping. Sinaloa cartel is working along with Los Rojos to kidnap especially teenagers, women teenagers, while the Arellano Felix family is known to be work with mareros, which is not marero for Mara Salvatrucha, Barrio 13. They are mareros from the Barrio 18, which are Mexicans, along with many other backgrounds. But it's interesting because now U.S. citizens, because they are U.S. citizens, are living in Tijuana, and they are kidnapping specific targets. No, for example, a Korean woman was kidnapped by gangs. So this photo was taken in Playas de Tijuana, where you can see they are working their way through the territory.
2 minutes to talk about the transborder aspect, basically, one of the other things that we looked at is the way that the border factors into the kidnapping dynamic in our region. One thing that's very important to note is that most kidnappings in the cross-border region take place, at least those, the vast majority of abductions in the cross-border region are child abductions by parents or other family members who are basically taking custody by extrajudicial means of their child. And so there are literally thousands and thousands of cases where this happens. It's a major area where law enforcement actually across the border works closely together and does a fairly good job of working together, because it's not an area that involves corruption or it's something where there's common ground. The second thing is that we have seen some cross-border abductions targeting people on the U.S. side. There have been, particularly in the case of individuals who appear to be connected in some way to organized crime, there have been a handful of cases of individuals being targeted for abduction and kidnapped, particularly there was a gang called Los Palillos, the Toothpicks, that was a splinter organization from the Arellano Felix that was targeting rival members of organized crime groups through some very creative schemes. And then third, the other thing that we see, of course, going back to the asylum issue, is the fact that large numbers of the people that are coming to seek asylum, and in cases where I participate as an expert witness, individuals who are fleeing Mexico because and voluntarily or voluntarily relocating to the United States because of their concerns about kidnapping. The other fastest growing community along the border, one of the other fastest growing communities on the border, is Chula Vista, which is a city with its own separate system of governance in San Diego County. And it's one of the, like Tijuana, one of the 5 fastest growing cities in the United States. Final observations. I think one of the things that we learned from Tijuana, looking at kidnapping, is that it is periodized, as many of the presentations have pointed out. There are different dynamics going on at different times that either lead to surges or decreases in kidnapping. And so it's important to evaluate what those conditions are, particularly with regard, in the case of Tijuana, to the dynamics going on between criminal organizations. One of the reasons why we've seen perhaps a decrease in the number of reported kidnappings recently is just that there is an awful lot of violence going on, and it's difficult to both wage war and do business at the same time. And then finally, I think there are some really interesting things that we see here in the cross-border region that you wouldn't see necessarily, that we don't see as much in the interior. So hopefully that will be of interest to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.